Hi, we are
Hi.
here. We're here for a webinar together. I am Katie McKay, and this is Amanda Moore. I'll have her introduce herself in a second. We're going to talk in this webinar about revising with the reader in mind, and in this specific one, about a lesson that we did with Amanda Moore's first graders about how we can work on our conclusions or our endings to our pieces, and how we can revise them or add new endings. My name is Katie McKay. I am the co-director of the Heart of Texas Writing Project in Austin, Texas. We're based out of the University of Texas at Austin. And I'm also a teacher consultant with that project. And I work at Travis Heights Elementary School, supporting and coaching teachers of multilingual students, specifically teachers who have refugees in their classrooms. And that's how I got to know Amanda Moore this year. She's a first grade teacher at Travis Heights. And Amanda, I'll let you introduce yourself. Tell us maybe a little bit about your experience in your classroom this year.
Well, yes, the way we met is because over half my kids are of a refugee background, mostly from Afghanistan, a few from Iraq. So our bilingual or ESL classroom is a little bit different demographic and comes with its own challenges and its own rewards. Our demographics was mostly boys as well. and they're just really awesome kids who have just tried a whole lot, and their parents are very interested in them reading and writing better. And it's been amazing watching how the increase in ability of one really goes hand in hand with the other.
Awesome. Another thing that I think is so impressive about Amanda is that was this your first or second full year as a full-time teacher? I know that you were a long-term substitute for a while. Tell us about how long you've been teaching.
Depends on how you look at it, either 1, 2, or 3 years. This is my first full year under contract. Before that, last year I taught the whole year, but was assigned my classroom 6 weeks in and was a long-term sub in that for the first semester. The year before that, I took over a class for the last semester of school as well. All at Travis Heights, all first grade ESL. So it's always been the same general population, same room, but technically this is my first full year teaching.
Nice. And this is your second career?
It is.
Yeah.
Yes. I come from a very different corporate background.
But from a family of educators, right?
Definitely a family of educators. My mom is the only daughter of 6 who is not a teacher. My dad was on school board. My grandfather also taught in some capacity. Very, very big in education.
Well, it's been so much fun working with you and your students this year. So in this webinar, we're going to look specifically at one lesson that I taught in Miss Moore's room. We've worked together, like we said, throughout the year doing writing workshop. And I'm going to have Amanda talk for just a second about some of her setup in her classroom. She just did a beautiful job setting up her room this year in a way that's really conducive to students having autonomy and agency in their classroom, making choices, being in charge of their own learning. And so Amanda, tell us just a little bit about how your classroom works as far as their flexible seating, but also how they access their tools for writing workshop.
So I think to some people it may seem very chaotic at first, but there is method to that madness. So with that population of high energy boys, I find that trying to confine some of them to one assigned seat was just counterintuitive to their learning process. So they have a variety of seating options when they come to class. They have traditional seating. There's some low seats on the floor. I have rocking chairs, the small plastic cradle rocking chairs that they can use with lap desk or a couch and beanbag chairs, wherever they feel like they can be most successful that day, you know, and within reason. And they don't, because there's not an assigned seat, there is no desk for them to get their tools from. So we have our toolkits over to the side, and they each have a plastic pencil box that actually Miss McKay provided for them at the beginning of the year so generously. But inside that toolbox, they would keep an eraser, at least 1 or 2 pencils, a couple of colored pencils, colored pens, markers, a couple of crayons, so that anytime they need to access their tools, they know that's theirs and where it is at all times. But I also had a kiosk set to the side that provided other tools, different papers, different colored pencils, scissors, glue, whatever they may need to finish their creative process. And they have access to that at all times throughout the day.
I'm just impressed every time I walk into your room at how independent your students are, especially for a relatively new teacher. That's one of the biggest challenges that I know a lot of first grade teachers have when they first come into the classroom. And just seeing how you pushed through, you know, you didn't say, this isn't working, I'm going to take all the tools away, or this isn't working, I'm going to put them all at desks. You know, I know it wasn't easy always, but you really pushed through and you persevered, and you were just committed to that independence that you wanted to give your students, and you worked through it, and it really paid off in the end of the year.
Thank you. I think it also it takes away that sense of, this is mine, I have to have this one item, this one tool to be dependent on my creation, as opposed to figuring out that's not available because we're all sharing. What can I do to facilitate my own creativity in a different way?
Absolutely.
So yeah, we even had boxes of markers are over here, crayons are over here, go find the tool that best fits your needs. And by the end of the year, at the beginning, trust me, it was chaos, but by the end of the year, they're like, oh, I don't have a red marker, what other color could I color this to make, or could I use a different medium to convey the same message? So that was nice to see them gain that independence.
Absolutely. It's going to pay off in second grade and in forever.
I hope so.
So this video, we'll just watch, it's only about 2 minutes of the mini lesson. The mini lesson was probably more like 10 or so minutes long. I liked this part of it, as you'll probably remember from being in there and taking the video, because we have Yahia there. Each of our webinars shows a different way that we can demonstrate a mini lesson. They all go through the same steps of starting with a link, just linking this lesson back to previous days, that every mini lesson is connected in some way to the work that we've been doing as authors. It's not in isolation. And then going into a really clear teaching point. The teaching point in this lesson is that authors pay close attention to how they're going to end their stories, and they want to think about their reader and how they want to make their reader feel, and how they want their story to come to a closing. And so one way that we demonstrated that, before this video, I actually did demonstrate it with a couple of different books. They were just random books that I had pulled off of a shelf, and I just flipped through them. I didn't read them in their entirety. I just said, this is a book about a little girl who doesn't want to brush her hair, and let's look how they end it. So I did show very briefly a few published authors as a demonstration. But then we had to kind of try it out like a we do. We had Yahia come up, and he brought up his journal, and we read a story that he'd written, and then we started thinking about how he could maybe end that story. So this was something that he'd written on a previous day. So I'll go ahead and just play it, and then we can talk a little bit about what we noticed. I thought we might be able to think of an ending for it. Once upon a time, there was a cow talking and laughing, and went to the beach and climbed the walls too. Very cool. And here's this cow at the beach climbing the walls, okay? Now, if I were going to think about a way for this story to end, so there's this cow talking and laughing, and he went to the beach and he climbed the walls, and I see how everyone kind of smiled and laughed a little bit. It's humorous piece, isn't it? It's funny.
This is a girl.
This is a girl cow climbing the walls at the beach. And so if we think about an ending for this piece, It could be something hopeful, it could be something happy, it could be what's going to happen to the cow next. What are some ideas? Do you have an idea? Tell me. To see, he peeked over to see the other side. Sorry, you're right. She peeked over to see the other side. That is this amazing ending that you just wrote out loud. You just wrote this ending that has us thinking towards something else, right? It doesn't tell us maybe what's on the other side, but the person reading it might wonder, I wonder what she saw. What a great ending. EJ, what ending could we put on this piece? We could put on, she could be sitting on the wall, and then she could be looking at the sunrise. That would be a beautiful, peaceful ending too. She got to the top of the wall and she looked out at a beautiful sunrise. Wouldn't that be a beautiful ending? Or a sunset. So she saw a beautiful sunset. So her view again, like kind of like opening up, what could her view be? Tell me, what is another way we can end the story? Then he was happy. Then when the sunset, he looked down. So I just kind of stopped it there. What are some things that you think about as you were watching that?
Well, for one thing, I just see the pride on Yahia's face. And he's so married to that character, because you don't get the full story in this clip, but he is very committed to that female cow, and that story progresses from there. But I love how the children are all engaged and really expanding his story through their own lens.
Yeah, I was impressed, you know, when you put it out there and you're like, what's a way this could end? They could have come up with anything and they really got it right away. I mean, not maybe all of them, but at least the ones that gave an example, like EJ and I can't remember the other person who offered up an ending, but those endings all really did come to like a closing feeling without having to be like a the end, you know, just I'm done, I'm at the bottom of my page, this is going to be over now. But instead, you know, this idea that the reader's going to be left with this like feeling of, okay, it's done. Yeah, and I love what you said too about Yahia and his smile, and I love how he corrected me those two times. No, it's a she. It's a she. He was.
It's a very important character twist later. You know, I do also, when you mentioned the end, that's one thing that it's really hard in the beginning to have students in first grade end a story without saying the end, or just kind of ending it and there's nothing there.
Yeah.
But so we kind of talk a lot throughout the year about not using the end.
Right, that doesn't that just the words the end doesn't really end the story. You know,
Right.
you could have them on there, but you got to also make sure you closed it out in some way. How's this going to really come to an end? Yeah. So this picture over here to the left just shows us a little bit about the anchor chart that we put together before they headed off. So because we were asking them to try out looking back at an old piece, I did feel like it was important to have kind of a list of steps there. Now, not all of them did. Some of them started a new piece, I believe, and that's fine. That was an invitation, but the idea of going back to an old piece, um, even if they've all been taught that before, might have been a new idea to some of them. And so I wanted to have those clear steps there. So they were supposed to go back and look through their writing, read their piece, think and talk about a last line, and then write that last line. And then this was a start to the list, but as you'll see later, we added more to it during share time after we had seen what happened in our conferences. So we'll go ahead to the next slide and just look at one thing one conference and how that went. So could you tell us who is Abdul? This is Abdul's writing, and who is he as a person?
Abdul is a high energy refugee child who is just, he is so brilliant, and he has learned so much this year. I'm just amazed at how much he's been able to absorb. And he's very interesting because his mother wants to further his education so much that she actually has enrolled in school herself and is learning reading and writing so that she can help him more in his own schooling. So it's a really neat family bond and a really wonderful dedication to education.
Absolutely. How exciting. Well, let's hear how this conversation goes with Abdul, and then we'll also have the opportunity to see how he ends up finishing his story. But here's the initial conference. Okay, so will you tell me what's happening in this story here?
I'm writing me and my friends play soccer. I made
Can I tell you what you just did? That's so amazing. See, I could see your mouth moving, and I could hear you sounding out those words, and so you knew what you were going to say, and you stretched it out so you could get each word on the page. So now it says, me and my friends play soccer. I made a score. You sounded that out beautifully. And so one thing we were talking about, remember in our lesson, was how we can end a story. So your story might have more to it, but if you're going to start thinking, even if you're not ready for your ending yet, how do you want your reader to feel at the end of the story? Do you want them to feel excited about the soccer game? Do you want them to feel to wonder what's going to happen next? I don't know. How do you want your reader to feel, do you think, at the end of your soccer story?
happy.
You want them to feel happy? So how are you going to end your soccer story, do you think?
Big. I made a tornado cake on Monday night.
Tell me it again.
I made a tornado cake.
You made a tornado kick? What is a tornado kick?
You jump and spin around and kick the ball into the ball.
Wow. Let me tell you that would be an awesome ending to your story. And I think that it could happen now, it could happen next, or it could happen once you're done, once you're ready to end this. But
once I'm ready to end it.
You're going to do it once you're ready to end. So you're going to add a little bit more, but then at the end, you're going to say, I made a tornado kick. So are you, one recommendation, one thing you might want to think about, and I'll write it down, is because I didn't know what a tornado kick is, there is possibly other people who would read your story who don't know what a tornado kick is. So when you write, I made a tornado kick, please could you use those other words that you just used, that you jumped up, you spun around, and then you kicked the ball? Would you do that?
No, I jumped up. No, first I kicked the ball up, then jumped up and you were spinning and kicked the ball while I was up.
So you actually have to kick the ball into the air, then you jump into the air, you turn around and you kick it. Wow, that does sound amazing, and that would be an amazing finale. Do you know what a finale is? It's like a big, important, exciting ending. So your finale could be about that tornado kick and describing what a tornado kick is. Would you do that? Cool. I just love how he, again, like kind of like Yahia, like he knew, he's like, no, that's not what it is. Like, let me tell you what really a tornado kick is, you know?
Yeah, and I do like how you are guiding him to create his own ending without writing it for him and using his words to help him write his own ending. I think that's pretty powerful too.
I think that's one thing that I find that conferences can be really hard they're always hard. You kind of are there, you're like, I don't want to be here for too long. I don't want to interrupt them too long, but I want it to be helpful. And I find that just listening and asking questions, they surprise you. You know, they come up with these things and you think, I mean, there's no better, I never would have been able to come up with that ending ever, you know? And so if you're just listening to them, they'll come up with these things like that female cow. That is an important part, you know, but it's not something that I would have ever, you know, even considered. I don't know why I would have considered him male, maybe because the writer was male, you know. Um, but just yeah, just listening to them, I think it really does go far in those conferences. So I'm going to keep going, and we're going to get to see in a minute how Abdul finished his piece. So this is EJ. Will you tell us a little bit about who EJ is?
EJ is, he has a lot of support at home. He has come alive at the end of the school year. He struggled a lot and was really resistant to writing in particular in the beginning of the year. But now he has just become almost poetic in his writing process. I don't know, I can't remember this story exactly, but he's become very impressive throughout the year.
Well, I think we'll see this. This is about him talking about a fairy in the tree.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, no, it's really impressive. So let's hear what EJ has to say.
Okay, so I see this. Did you just start this today? Or is this an old one?
No, this is a good one.
Awesome. Well, so tell me about what it's about.
So it's about me, and it's not about me, it's about someone that I just made up. And they were sleeping in a tree hole, and while they were sleeping in a tree hole, the tree actually sparkled up in the moonlight, and all the fairies comes out. You see those yellow X's right there?
Yes.
Those are the fairies.
Those are beautiful fairies. Wow, and that yellow really makes it pop.
Mm-hmm.
So you're thinking about your ending now? Is that right?
Yes, I'm thinking about my end.
Okay.
So it says, I am a tree. I might look boring, but I sparkle the moonlight. The fairies come out the trees. The guy woke up. He saw all of the fairies.
So there's the guy living in the tree, and when he woke up, he saw all of the fairies. Well, how do you want your reader to feel when they finish your story?
I want them to feel like impressed about my story.
Impressed about your story?
So he woke up, he climbed a tree, and he grabbed one of the fairies, and he looked at them like right up here. And I should draw a picture of that right there.
I think that's a good idea. So what I hear you saying is that you want your reader to be really impressed with what's happening at the end of your story, like to really think about that. And you're thinking that what helps them do that is if he actually holds a fairy in his hand and he looks at it up close.
Yes.
I think that's a beautiful ending to your story. And what I also heard you say is that you think that if you draw a picture of him holding it in his hand, that would help your story also to really make that impression.
Yes.
Okay, so what I'm going to write down in my notes then is that you're planning on adding a picture and adding a line about him grabbing the fairy and him looking at it sitting closely in his hand.
Like this.
Yeah.
Going like this. He's looking at the fairy. Like the fairy's like this tall.
And it's sitting right in his hand, about that
tall?
tall?
No, it's like standing in his hand.
Standing in his hand. That would be beautiful language for you to use. The fairy stood in his hand, right, as he looked at him.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
So there are a couple things I want to point out about EJ's story. As one, that was something that he wrote earlier, about a month prior, and he left it undone. but he wrote it. Our campus has a beautiful outdoor space. You know, we back up to a park, and so we often do our writing workshop outside so that they can become inspired by whatever's passing by. And so this was, he just saw this neat old tree and sat down and came up with the first side of the page while he was literally sitting in a tree. So it's neat to see them have these inspirations that you get just organically. But he also, you know, I didn't know he had that kind of imagination and that ability to pull it out of himself without guiding. And what we start even down in pre-K is drawing is writing, and they really live that all the way through the writing process. And you see how much his drawing has added to his story and how he's going back to that to glean details that he can add later as well. So I like how we see it all come together.
I agree. I think that's such an important point you're bringing up, like that. It probably even helped him. His drawing probably also helped him come back into that space. You know, he's not outside anymore like he was when he started this piece. And like you said, it was like a month ago. But the fact that he had used that yellow, that he had put that detail in it, that he thought it through, it probably helped him mentally come back to like, oh yeah, that's what this is about. This is where I'm going with this, and come back to it. I love that I had the opportunity to go outside with Miss Moore in her class one day, and it was just incredible. Same as coming into her room where they all had their notebook, their journals with them, and also their little boxes of writing utensils, and they just knew exactly what to do. You could tell it was a habit that they were in, and they all got comfortable in different spots outside. Yeah, so all of those things, I mean, you just said it so beautifully, Miss Moore, about EJ's work right here, that he's really able to. Another thing I was thinking about as you were talking is this idea of merging the real and the unreal, the fantasy of the fairies together with this real tree that he sat in, and then like seeing his hand there, and he's like, no, it's like about this, really showing me, no, he's standing, not sitting, and he's like about this size, but he's merged even in his mind this the fantasy that he's creating has become real in his mind. So he can even create it, and that's what a real effective author is able to do, right? Is in their mind, this is a real place that's happening. This is a real thing that's happening.
It's just like, yeah, he is girl cow and EJ's fairy in his hand. It's very important to them, and because they believe it, it makes the writing that much more powerful.
Absolutely. Let's go ahead and look here. Tell me about, I'm forgetting her name. Who wrote this? This was Talia, was it?
This might have been Talia.
I'm pretty sure that this was, well, not 100%.
When we start playing it, I'll tell you about the author after I hear her voice. Because
yeah. Let's hear what she has to say.
So tell me about, what do you have here? What are you working on? What's your story about?
We went to the zoo.
Mm-hmm. Will you read it to me?
I wrote about cheetahs. The cheetahs are predators. They have spots. After we went home.
So now you're trying to figure out how you're going to end?
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be about after you get home? Well, you know those other authors that we saw in our mini lesson? We saw that sometimes they end their story with a character thinking. So what were you thinking when you got home after you had seen those predators, those cheetahs
I
at the
wrote
zoo?
about it.
You wrote about it?
And I drew a picture on it.
And you drew a picture about them? Tell me though, what were you thinking in your mind? What was your impression of the cheetahs? What did you think of them? Did you like them? Were they scary? Did you dream about them? I don't know, did you care about them? Did they make you feel love in your heart? Did they make you feel excitement? Kind of, what were you feeling or thinking when you went home and you wanted to write more about those cheetahs? Did you think they were beautiful? Did you want to take care of them?
Beautiful, and they had a sharp.
So you remembered how beautiful they were and how sharp their teeth were. Something I hear you saying, and that some authors do, is that sometimes something can be beautiful but also be kind of scary. Did you feel that way about the cheetahs? Did you feel like they were beautiful but also a little bit scary?
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that? What made them beautiful?
That they had the black spots.
Mm-hmm. And what made them scary?
Their teeth.
Yeah. So you're gonna, after we went home, you could talk about how you thought about the cheetah's black spots and the big teeth, and how he was both what? He was
nice.
He was nice, but also scary. Yeah. So you could add that. That would be a great ending to your story. What do you think?
Good.
Yes, that was Talia. Talia is, just the last few months of school are just amazing with all of them. But Talia, I mean, I'm looking at her writing here, and I'm just so impressed. I didn't even recognize her handwriting for a second because just how much it improved even after this, just from all the practice. But and I'm very impressed that she spelled wrote correctly. That amazes me. The little things they pick up. But she was a struggling writer. But I think having that autonomy throughout the year to write about whatever they want to or whatever they're feeling has given them a lot of confidence to show what they can do. Sometimes it's just showing themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The funny thing is, there were no cheetahs at the zoo, so she's
in her
partially made up. We did go to the zoo. There were no cheetahs.
Well, I feel like there were. I could picture it myself. I could picture it I've seen before at the zoo.
She even drew it in a cage. Like, it's amazing.
Yeah, well, one thing when I watch this conference is I think about, like, am I leading her too much? She was kind of quiet. It could be that I had the video camera on, but she was a little quiet. It was a little hard to get much out of her. I was like pulling it a little bit more than I was with the other two. But one thing that was interesting that happened after this is I had a conference with another girl. I don't think I have it in this slideshow, but who was writing about a birthday party, and her drawing was actually of her picking up after the birthday party. And she was writing about how she had so much fun at the party and how her mom was helping her clean up. And I thought about how those are also contrasting ideas, that you're having all this fun. And we always feel that, right? At the end of a party, we're like, you don't even mind cleaning up that much because you're still kind of on the high of having had such a good time at that party. And so I put those two in touch a little bit where I said, Talia was also using the same idea or thinking about this. So we added that to our chart at the end, that another way we can end is with these contrasting ideas. So even if it wasn't something that Talia was completely ready for, like I might have been pushing her a little beyond what she would have thought of on her own, then if she'd seen someone else do it and then a few more times, I think it's something that she could have gotten later on.
She struggles with confidence, and she struggles with bouts of shyness, around people. She runs around screaming like a crazy person with me, but other people walk in and she kind of goes into her little shell. So that's just her personality. But she could definitely come up with something on her own. But that's something I'd like for her to explore more on a personal level next year, is really getting even more confidence in herself, not just as a writer, but as a student.
Yeah, and even that point that you made about her writing the word wrote correctly, but then when she went back and she read it, it took her a minute. I had to help her. And I think that is another sign of somebody who's still developing their confidence as a writer, is that she might have remembered how to spell it in that moment, or maybe even seen it written somewhere else and written it down. to match it. But then that kept her from knowing what she had written on her own because she was getting it from somewhere. And but she's also taking risks here with the word they and the word after, so she's kind of on that line where she's like, I'm still feeling like I want it all to be perfect, and I might have to look elsewhere for it, but I also have an idea.
Right there.
She's just on that cusp. Absolutely.
She spelled about correctly and predators. So and this was a free write, so she
yeah.
Out of her.
No, she's gonna, she's already, like you said, grown so much, but she's also just at that stage where it's gonna just keep snowballing, more and more in her writing. And the more she sees other kids doing around her, I think she's just gonna really blossom even more. Well, we're gonna move on. We get to see the end here of Abdul's piece and what he ended up putting at the end. So I'll go ahead and play. This, remember, was the tornado kick. We'll see what he added. I think I have him read it to us here.
Okay, Abdul, will you read me your story so we can see the ending? Hear the ending now?
Yes. Me and my friends playing soccer. I made a score. When I believed myself, then I did the tornado kick. I kicked the ball up and I jumped up and I stand and kicked the ball and I made a score.
Awesome ending. I love how you ended it, and I love how you added tornado kick in.
So that got cut off just a little bit there, but I want to look closely at that. I'm going to see if I can put it in the right place so that we can see the close-up of that there. So one thing, I've listened to this one a few times because I wanted to pay so close attention. I love this one line he has in here. I don't know if we can see it, but he says, I made a score when I believe in myself. And I just thought that was so deep of him, this idea of like believing in himself and how that comes in the middle. But then he goes back to the tornado kick at the end like he had in his plan. And it's really just an effective strategy as an author to just like, he's kind of explaining matter-of-factly in the beginning, I play with my friends, I made a score. And then he goes into this deeper, like, I believe in myself. And then it builds up to this tornado kick. It's like, well, I'm playing and I make a score. Now I believe in myself. And now look what I can do. And it kind of just builds and builds on itself. Another thing is
tornado.
yeah. And then as I put in the title here, he also goes and adds that exclamation point.
I wanted to comment on that. I'm so proud of that exclamation point.
Yeah, and it's not like some kids throw them in all over the place, right? There's this overuse once they learn how to use them, but he really used it effectively there where he's like dot at the end, like punch at the end, and I made a score. Like the first score, I don't think he had an exclamation point at. It's just like I was playing, I made a score, ooh, now I believe in myself, and then I did the tornado kick, and I kicked it up, and then I went, I made a score, It builds this anticipation, this rhythm, this excitement as it goes. It's just really effective. I was so excited with how it all turned out in the end there.
Yeah, I tell you what, this kid is going to be something someday. He really is.
I see that in all your students. You've really grown them so much this year. It's been super exciting. So this is really, I just included this. It's not this like pretty anchor chart like we'd see on Pinterest or anything, right? And it's toward the end of the year, so they might not even see it again. But what I liked here was that, you saw at the beginning, we had just a few things on our chart. We had 4 ways to end: hopeful, what happens next, repetition, and a smile or some type of feeling at the end. But then after I had met with them for their conferences, all of these other ways came out. Abdul and Bobby both had some exciting action at the end. That's not anything we had even looked at as a possibility when we read authors' books or when Yahia did his example. but it was something that came out in the conferences, and then in the share time we could say, here's another way we could end our piece. It was Asma and Talia that were comparing and contrasting ideas. Like it was the story about the party, and then her story about the zoo. The exclamation I put in there that Abdul had. Jalen, I can't remember what her story was, but she was kind of like wondering something at the end. So we added in this idea of kind of ending with a question.
Mm-hmm.
So I think share time, we often think of an author's chair, and sometimes it is that, or turning and talking and sharing. But also share time can be coming back to that original anchor chart and idea and adding to it and saying, what happened during writing today, and how can we even add more ideas to what we were talking about?
And I don't think you mentioned earlier that these ideas, these were all things the kids said during your lesson. So this wasn't you saying you end with exciting action or hopeful. These are their words. And they just came up with new words. They didn't say the exact sentence, convincing reader to think or do something. But, they said, oh, trying to make them think something. Mm-hmm. So, I think that's important, that the whole process made them expand on what they wrote in the beginning as a class. They expanded together and came up with this expanded anchor chart.
I think that's a really good point, because like we do often make anchor charts where we kind of have an idea in mind of where they might go, and I might have had an idea or two in mind, but when we use that constructivist approach to teaching and we really don't know where it's going to go, we just let it be a conversation and we come up with it together. They read that, they understand that they're really a part of the meaning making, that you're not just the one guiding them to the right answer, that you're constructing this meaning of ideas together. There isn't a right way to end a story. There's a million ways, and let's come up with more. So yeah, I think that's important, that it really was coming from the kids. So we're just going to close off our webinar today with this thought. I found this quote from the book Talking, Drawing, Writing that we read from some this year, and we talked about toward the beginning of the year as we were getting our workshops going across the school. Revision in writing grows from a classroom culture that is built of the value of seeing again, which is what revision means. And I don't know, I think of EJ's right away when I read that, and the fact that he really went back to a piece that he'd written before, and he saw it again, and he was able to then move on and even add more.
Yes. I'm just very impressed with how much they've grown and how much these writing workshops have helped them grow. And they'll be able to take that process with them to all aspects of their scholastic careers. Revision is something that it's not just for writing workshop time. It happens in science and even math, like going back and seeing how you can improve something. This is not a skill just for one subject area.
That's an important point. Well, thank you. We'll end it with that. But thanks so much, Ms. Moore, for all your work this year. It's so exciting to see all that your kids have grown.
Thank you so much.